Hi. What I want to do right now is walk you through the writing assignment and give you some tips and some guidelines for successfully completing the four writing assignments. So I'm sharing my screen right now, and I'm actually in the week 1B module. So if we go to the assignments folder, uh, click on the link there, open it up, you'll see that there are all the activities for the first week. Um, I'm going to click on the assignment one instructions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some quick guidelines and maybe a couple of tips for how best to complete these assignments. So let's click begin. Well, before we do that, I'm going to very quickly uh, open up the academic writing and writing assignment guidelines. This document is in the course syllabus and resources or documents link. If you read through this, the first 3 pages are a description of academic writing. Now, academic writing is a particular style. Uh, some of the some of the features of this style are that it is kind of concise. It's probably a little bit dry, to be completely honest, but it's because academic writing is meant to be impersonal. It's supposed to be driven by the arguments that you're trying to make as an author, and the evidence that you're laying out in support of your claims. So it's going to be written not in first person, but rather third person. It's going to use precise language. It is going to be written, your writing assignments are going to be written as complete paragraphs. More on that in just a few moments. Um, you're going to say everything that you need to say and no more. So that's what we mean by precision, or sometimes we refer to that as being concise, or that your writing features a great deal of brevity. So those kinds of terms are what we're talking about there. So read through these first few pages again to get a good understanding and a good overview of what is meant by academic writing as a style. Starting on the fourth page of the document, you're going to see some specific guidelines and recommendations for these writing assignments. Uh, there are two kinds of questions that you're going to be responding to in the four written assignments. The first are what we call definition application questions. Definition and application questions are questions in which you are responding by providing the definition of a particular term, as well as an example of that term from the course materials. A couple of things to keep in mind about the definition and application questions is that there are 3 parts. I've color coded them here in the document, although of course your actual responses will not be color coded. But I've color coded them here so you can see the 3 different parts of the of each question. So the first part of the question, which is coded here in blue, will be the definition of the term from the outline or the chapter. So go to the glossary of the chapter, or you go to the outline that we're using in that particular unit, and you will find the definition for the term there. Uh, the second part, which is coded in yellow, is your paraphrased version of the definition. In other words, the definition in your own words. Now, this is something that's really challenging and relative to the first part. Right, the first part is almost literally a copy and paste. Um, this second part means that you have to understand the definition because you want to be able to put it into your own words. That means an accurate and precise reflection of the original, but in in your own words, in different language. And don't just use a thesaurus to swap out some words for others. Right? This is one of those things where you're going to need to provide a phrasing for the definition that is distinct enough that I know that you understand it, and not just that you're able to sort of swap out some words for others. So that's the second part. And the third part is going to be the example. And that part here is coded in green. Now, the example is also a little bit tricky. Examples have to come from the course materials. Sometimes you will find a very, very obvious and clear example. Sometimes you will find an example that requires a little bit of elaboration or a little bit of connecting on your part. So in this response here that I have for culture, to illustrate that, I mention Durkheim's notion of social facts as an example of culture. But it doesn't say in the actual quoted passage here, which I have in this last part of the response. The quoted passage does not, in fact, actually mention the word culture. So what I need to do here was put a sentence as a kind of preamble to that, right? By acknowledging their cultural roots, social facts can be seen as an example of culture. So sometimes you're going to have to add a sentence or two to sort of elaborate on why the example you're using is in fact a good example of the term or the concept. Examples need to be specific instances of a term. They need to be specific instances of a particular concept. Sometimes students will describe or explain, but understand that that's not the same thing as an example. So if the term were teacher, just imagine that for a moment, that you're being asked to give an example of a teacher. You would not say that the teacher is the person who stands in front of a classroom and delivers content and assesses academic work. That's a description of what a teacher does. An example of a teacher would be Professor Gramlich, right? So something concrete, something specific. So you want to make sure that you're getting that correct. Now, the point breakdown for these responses is that you're going to get 1 point for providing the correct outline or chapter glossary definition. You can get anywhere from 0 to 3 points for a clear and accurate paraphrasing of that definition, because that is the more challenging aspect of this part of the assignment. And you can get up to 2 points for your example or your illustration. So just so you understand the point breakdown, most of the weight that you're going to get in credit for these responses is going to be for the paraphrasing, because that is the most challenging aspect of that. There'll be 6 of these. There'll be 6 definition and application questions on each of the 4 writing assignments. Give yourself plenty of time to work on these answers. Although these seem very straightforward, it is sort of time consuming to find examples, and I'll have a couple of things to say about that in just a moment. The second part of the assignment will be analyses questions. There are going to be 2 analysis questions on each of the writing assignments. For these, you can earn up to 30 points in total, because these are much more challenging questions. For example, on the document here, we see an example. We've seen an example of an analysis question. What are social facts? What is social determinism? How are these concepts related? So the first thing you want to recognize is that there are 3 parts to this analysis question. Each analysis question is going to be a multi-part question. Sometimes there will be 3 parts, sometimes there will be 4 parts, maybe sometimes there'll be 5 parts. Each part should get its own paragraph. So the analysis responses are going to be multi-paragraph responses, more like a traditional essay. So the first part of my response here to this question is a few sentences long, in which I give a definition of social facts, including a paraphrased version of that. The second part of the response responds to what is social determinism, also sort of a definition and explanation, and then a third paragraph in which the 2 concepts are connected, which is the last part of the question itself. So just make sure that you are responding fully to each of the parts of the question, because again, you can earn up to 8 points for fully responding to a question. You can earn up to 8 points for clearly responding to a question, and you can earn up to 8 points for accurately responding to the question. You also get 4 points for proper use of your citations and up to 2 points for grammar and syntax. In other words, the clarity and accuracy of your writing. Some stuff here on the next page about paraphrasing and some tips on paraphrasing. There's a tendency sometimes to think that paraphrasing has to be shorter than the original version, but here it isn't necessarily that you're going for a shorter version of the definition, but rather a restated version of the definition in your own words. And then the last page of the guidelines shows you some of the overview of the citation and reference format used by the American Sociological Association, the ASA. And again, if you want a good example of what ASA format looks like in practice, all of the documents that you read for this course, including the chapters, are formatted using American Sociological Association citation and reference format. So again, very, very straightforward, but I'll show you more about that in just a moment. The next document, also available in the same place you'd find the guidelines, is a set of examples. So these are actual responses from students' papers in previous courses. And I've got a couple of examples of what not to do for the definition and application responses here and here. And then I have an example of a good response. So you can kind of read these and you can look at the issues that make these responses above not particularly good. And you can read here for the things that make this response above a particularly good one, right? So look at this as a kind of do's and don'ts. And the same thing here on the second page for the analysis responses. So I've given you, again, a sample question and then a couple of examples of responses that were not particularly good and the issues that exist with those responses, as well as an example of what a good response looks like and what exactly makes that a good response. So both of these documents are available under the course syllabus and resources link. So I strongly recommend that you guys take a look at that. The other thing I want to show you real quick, I'm going to pull up the chapter just to have that open in a tab. There we go. I'm going to go back to the writing assignment here in the second week's module. Click on that link. Now, when you click on Begin, just like with the practice writing assignment, you're going to be able to come back to this and work on it in stages. You can also, of course, if you want, work on a version of these responses in, say, for example, Google Docs or in Microsoft Word, as long as at the end you copy and paste your responses into the text boxes here in the assignment. Everything ultimately does have to be submitted in these assignments through Blackboard. So if you click on Begin, you will see that all of the questions for the assignment appear right away. So the first 6, questions 1 through 6, each of them feature a term from the first module, from the first chapter, from Outline 1. And you're going to give me a restatement of the definition. You're going to copy and paste the original definition. You're going to give me a restatement of that definition in your own words and provide me an example for each of these six concepts. Then there are 2, in questions 7 and 8, there are 2 analysis questions. And again, these are multi-part questions. What are inconvenient facts? Definition from the chapter and paraphrase definition. That's your first paragraph. Explain how they allow people to gain a more accurate understandings and insight. That's going to be your second paragraph. And then the third paragraph is going to deal with how they are similar to Berger's notions of shocking discoveries. So this response number 7 in assignment 1 is going to have at least 3 paragraphs because there are 3 parts to this question. You can go a little bit longer, right? You can actually add a couple of additional paragraphs if they're warranted, but you're not going to go less than that. Right? You're not going to go shorter. And then again, you see here, question 8 is similarly structured, right? Explain how inconvenient facts and shocking discoveries help someone use their sociological imagination as described by Mills. That's going to be one paragraph. Then provide an example from one of the course readings and show how the example illustrates this. That will be at least a second paragraph. Question number 9 is your reference section. And again, you're formatting this using the ASA guidelines. So let me show you a couple of tips. A couple of little shortcuts that you can consider using. So I'm going to go to the chapter, and I am going to do something maybe a little bit. It's not really a cheat, but I use the Command F function to open up a little search window, and I'm going to type in "for example," the phrase "for example." Every time, and you can see there are 19 times that phrase, for example, appears in this chapter. Every time that phrase appears, the next bit of material in the reading is going to be an example. Now, it may not be an example of what you're looking for, but this is a really good place to start when you're looking for examples. So I'm going to scroll through. This is an example of some methodology, right? So what level of analysis you might use if you're doing sociological research. That might not be particularly helpful. Economics also studies society. That's not necessarily going to be helpful either. Here we go. Context. At the level of social interactions, context consists mainly of where you are, when you're there, and who you're with. In a classroom, for example, a student might be quiet and attentive, waiting for a prompt from the instructor to raise their hand and ask a question. This is a pretty good example of the impact of context on human behavior, right? So I might sort of set that aside and make a note of that somewhere. So each time you find the passage, now these are not the only examples. I want to be really clear. These are not the only examples that exist in the chapters. This is just a really easy way to find at least some of them, which is to go through and use a search phrase. The other thing you can do, of course, is that when you're reading the chapters and when you're reading the course materials, knowing that you're going to be looking for things like examples of the sociological imagination, examples of social determinism and social facts, examples of cultural relativism and ethnocentrism. If you know what those terms mean, you can be looking for examples of them as you do the course readings. So I strongly recommend that at the beginning of each of the new modules, you guys reach out to the assignment and make a list of all the terms that you're going to need examples for, and go ahead and start looking for those examples. Somewhere in the back of your head, you should be compiling a list of those, because that's going to make your writing assignments go much more smoothly, right? If you're looking for these examples at the very last minute, the day before the assignment is due, these are going to be very, very difficult assignments to complete. But if, on the other hand, you've been finding examples as you go, that's going to be a tremendous time saver. Right? So go through there and look for examples. That's my first tip. My second tip is to save yourself some time, use the glossaries, right? So the first term that you're being asked to define here is sociological imagination. So if we go back to the chapter and we scroll all the way down to the glossary, we can find the definition for sociological imagination right here at the very bottom of page 17. So I'm going to copy that, just highlight it and copy it, and I'm going to go over here to the assignment, and in this text box I'm just going to paste the response. Now I'm going to remove the formatting, and this is clearly not written as a sentence. So the first thing I want to do is I want to turn it into a sentence, because academic writing requires that we write in complete sentences. So we would say sociology defines the sociological imagination as the ability to see the impact of social forces on our private lives. There you go. That's the very first part of the response. Very, very easy to do. You just have to do a little bit of cleaning up. Paraphrasing is going to take a little bit longer, right? Putting something into your own words is going to require that you understand what this definition means, but at the very least, you've saved yourself a little bit of time And you can do that again for each of the questions that's going to require you to provide a definition from the chapter or from the readings or from the outline. You can go to those sources and you can find those definitions and get that part of the assignment knocked out very, very quickly. Literally on the very first day that the assignment is available, this should be something that everybody takes care of. The second thing you want to do, of course, is that let's say you've taken an example of the sociological imagination from the chapter. So I'm going to use Barbara Ehrenreich's example. From the chapter here about her work, her ethnographic work in looking at people engaging in minimum wage work. Right, she recognized that the economic circumstances and the lifestyles of people who work in minimum wage jobs is a function of the fact that they engage in minimum wage work, right? They have a particular lifestyle that's a reflection of the economic circumstances they find themselves in. So that, I think, is a really good example of somebody using their sociological imagination. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to copy this passage, and I'm going to go back to the assignment here, and I'm just going to create a couple of returns, and I'm just going to paste this passage in here. And I would clean this up. I would add a couple of sentences saying, that one example of somebody using the sociological imagination is Barbara Ehrenreich, who recognized that the lifestyles of people in minimum wage work were functions of their low pay. That's usually going to be a sufficient amount of contextualization for the passage. And then I'm going to write something like, as she noted, comma, not period, as she noted, we'll take out all that extra verbiage there and put a quote here. As she noted, it's almost impossible to get by on minimum wage work. Close that, and now say Ehrenreich also experienced and observed attitudes many middle and upper class people never think about. Close that quote. Now, there's my example of the sociological imagination. I'm going to create a sentence leading into this that explains exactly how it's an example of the sociological imagination. But one of the things that I want to make clear is that this is not actually Ehrenreich being quoted, right? This is actually the author of your chapter. Now, the author of your chapter also happens to be me. So this is going to be really easy. You would write something like, as Gramlich pointed out, and help if I could spell, pointed out, Ehrenreich noted, it's almost impossible to get by on minimum wage work. And now I can change this Ehrenreich to a she because I don't want my two sentences to sound too repetitive. She also experienced and observed attitudes many middle and upper class people never think about. Now, this quoted material, and again, whether you quote material or whether you're paraphrasing material that comes from another source, you are going to want to provide a citation to that. So last name of the author. And then normally what you do in ASA style is include the year. The problem is the chapters don't have a year of publication, right? They're not dated published material. So the convention in academic and ASA formatting is to say ND for no date. And then, of course, the period here at the very end closes the sentence. So you wouldn't put a period here after the word about. You would close the quote with the quotation mark there, but then you would actually provide your citation and then close the sentence. So that would be how you would create a cited source. Now, some people have asked, why don't we cite the source of the definitions? Well, because the instructor of the course, me, right, I'm telling you, you don't have to. Sometimes, you're going to be required to provide sometimes you're going to be required to provide a citation. For these assignments, you do not have to provide a citation for your source. I know where they are coming from. They're coming from the outline. They're coming from the chapter. So you don't need to provide a citation to that. The other thing that you often encounter in a citation and reference format is that you are required to provide page numbers. Again, for the purposes of this assignment, you do not need to provide a page number. Right? I'm waiving that expectation. I'm waiving that requirement for you. But that doesn't mean that next time you're writing a paper for your chemistry class that you don't have to provide a citation including page numbers for your sources. This is a sort of a special circumstance, because a lot of the excerpts that a lot of the passages that you're going to be reading are excerpts from longer pieces, and the page number on the excerpt does not correspond to the page number on the original source. Let me give you another pro tip for saving you some time as you work on these writing assignments. In addition to a citation, you're always going to have to also provide a reference. So if you go to the end of the chapter, or if you go to the end of the supplemental reading, the very last thing you're going to find there is the reference. So what you're going to want to do, again, to save yourself a little time, is select that particular piece, copy it, go back to the assignment, go down to question 9, which, remember, again, is your reference section, paste, always remove the formatting, paste your response in there, and then you've got your reference. Now, the one thing that is not preserved when you clear the formatting, of course, is that sources, publication titles and sources need to be italicized. So you would do that, and then you've got your reference for the citation that appears here in question 1. So that's the easy way to sort of get a significant amount of progress knocked out pretty quickly on these definition and application questions. For the analysis questions, obviously these are going to take a little bit longer. My recommendation, and it's not just me, it's everybody who insists on helping you guys become better writers, because we can all be better writers, is to approach your writing from a very organized starting point. So what I just did was I copied and pasted the question into the text box here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a little bit of an outline. So now I've taken the 3 parts of the question and I've given them each a little bit of a section here for me to start to develop them. And as I answer the question, first part of the question here, I need to provide a definition of inconvenient facts from the chapter. So I can go to the chapter and I can scroll up to the glossary here, and I can highlight and copy and paste the definition. Just like that, very easy. And again, you don't need to worry about providing a citation for this part of the response. It's enough to just go and get the definition from the chapter or from the outline. Now you would write a paraphrased definition by starting perhaps with "in other words," which is a really nice simple transition, and then you would provide your own paraphrased definition. And then as you get that part of the question all knocked out, you can take this part here, which was kind of functionally operating as your outline, and you can remove it. And what's left, of course, is the content of your response, which I'm just going to highlight there so we can kind of see that. Now, again, just like with the quizzes, these answers can be saved, or sometimes they automatically save as you're working. But if you ever need to leave and come back and do additional work on these assignments, because these are typically not going to be something that you can finish at the first sitting, click on Save All Answers. And again, Blackboard will prompt you and you say OK. Then you can leave that page, confirm that you're leaving. And then if you want to go back in and resume that writing assignment at a later point, when you click on that link, it'll tell you again to continue rather than begin. Right? So you can click on continue and you can scroll down, and all of the stuff that you put in there is preserved and ready for you to come back and work on a little bit more. So the important thing about these writing assignments, aside from sort of the things that I just walked through, right, the tips and the practical considerations on how to complete these things in a way that's relatively easy for you guys, although there isn't a way to make them less time consuming. They really are going to just take some time. My recommendation is start as soon as they're available, right? So if you go back to course materials, let's do this. One of the things you'll see in the overview for this module is that number 4 says you're going to review and begin work on the first written assignment. Now, the first written assignment isn't due until the 31st of March, right? So this gives you some time, because this module that we were just working in, this module is going to be available on the 17th of March. So that gives you some time to sit down and work on it. Now you also have the advantage that spring break falls at the end of the first week of class. So that gives you an extra week to kind of work on your assignment. You won't have that much time for assignments 2, 3, and 4. You're only going to have a total of 10 days from the time it's available to the time that it's due. But generally speaking, you should be able to get these things knocked out in 10 days if you give yourself a little bit of time each day to work on them. These assignments are designed to take probably 2 or 3 days at the most, right? 2 or 3 days of focused attention and work, and you should be able to complete these assignments. They're not particularly complicated. They're not particularly difficult. They are a little bit time consuming though, and if you wait until the last minute to get started on them, that will end up being reflected in the quality of your work, and obviously you want to get the best possible scores you can for all the work you do in this class. One last thing I want to point out, and I'm going to go back into the assignment here to illustrate this, is if I happen to submit this assignment, right? So I'm going to go ahead and submit. It's telling me, of course, that I have a number of incomplete responses, but I go ahead and click submit anyway, and then I realize, oops, I screwed up. There were still some questions that I needed to respond to and some cleaning up that I needed to do. If I go and click on assignment 1 again, I'm going to have the opportunity to begin a new version of it, right? So if I click on begin, it's going to take me back to the beginning. Now, none of the work that I did before is going to be preserved here, because this is a brand new attempt. But each time you start a brand new attempt, you get a chance to sort of start over again. And I will grade the last attempt that you submit. So if you submit 4 different versions of the assignment, as each one gets progressively better, I'm going to grade the last one, right? That's the one that I'm going to consider your last and best work. So don't worry if you accidentally submit a response by mistake or an assignment by mistake. Let me know. I can find a way to make that material available to you so that nothing that you wrote was lost. But you can then bring that material into the updated version, the correct and current version of the assignment that you're working on. Kind of foolproof, right? Kind of very, very difficult to mess these assignments up. But again, my advice is to get started on them early, work on them incrementally and consistently over time, and they should be very manageable. And again, if there's any difficulty, if you have any questions, if there's some help you need as you're working through these responses, reach out to me, let me know, and I'll be happy to take a look what you've got, and give you whatever feedback I can. All right, until next time, take care.